Sup, name's Emphasis, and yeah, let's just get down to business.
Previously.
Next time I'll finish the spear, do the shading, and look at one important point that is needed for any drawing. Who would have guessed that this idiot would accidentally delete part of the already recorded material? Now this will serve as a lesson for me to check the folder before deleting it entirely. Anyway, let's get to work and start with the spear. Under the previous video, one of the commenters, there are only 2 commenters including me by the way, mentioned an important point that I should have considered when creating the spear, namely the balance. The spear had an overly large blade on top, attached to a thin shaft. To fix this flaw, I'll increase the size of the shaft and slightly enlarge the lower blade so that the weight is still slightly top heavy, but not excessively so. As for copying the spear onto the main drawing, you'd know how much time I spent on it last time if the footage hadn't been deleted. But who cares, right? At this point I want to clarify the following. If you, like me, aren't great at instantly visualizing how a specific object will look from a certain angle, then start by blocking it out with simple shapes before moving on to the main part. I know this is probably the most obvious advice, but I underestimated my own drawing and that turned out to be a mistake. That said, after building the structure, the final drawing turned out pretty well. So now let's get to the next part. In the last part I forgot to draw the robe. And guess what? I'm going to draw this robe. The difficult task here is to determine the behavior of a robe and the relation to wind and other factors such as direction of movements. It wouldn't have been so difficult if I hadn't come up with an unusual form for a robe in the form of 4 pieces of fabric that behave differently. A bit late, but I changed the layer opacity to make it easier to navigate. Now that the rope is finished, you can see why I drew the full armor in the first place. To make this part more interesting, I'll damage the rope and add some effect to it. Not too many. Yeah, draw the full armor isn't really necessary, but it's adding more options and helps me to see clearly how the part will be drawn underneath. The mask also deserved the honor of being forgotten by me. There is nothing special here. The angle allows you to completely copy the mask without any problems. As with the rope, it was to be expected that the mask would also be damaged. removing the axis. As promised, I'll add a light trail from the right eye, because, well, you know.
It's cool!
Dealt with the mistakes for now, and now we can move on to the hard part. Finally, right? After so many attempts to find the right ways to shade the drawing, it's about time to put those skills to use. I can't say I've become a master of shading after just 3 videos, but I can try to bring one of my ideas to life. So, first up is the last video. In it, the author used shadow as a separate light source. Simply put, you start with a tone that represents the shadow. I'll shade the wall silhouette and leave the rest for later. In the second video, the author, who I'm honestly getting pretty tired of seeing on my channel and everywhere tutorials are found, Lumière, showed a technique used by Tight Kubo. It's cross-hatching at a sharper angle, which gives the drawings an interesting look and makes the shadows denser. Described it as best as I could. No one can deny that Kubo-san draws incredibly well, but whenever it's amazing or not, my result last time was far from very original. This time nothing changed. That's when I realized that the most suitable method for me is actually the most obvious one. In my opinion, this result fit the overall picture much better. As for the shading of the rest of the parts, I came up with the idea of using similar hatching to create texture, simulating a metallic effect. Don't know how it will look in the end, but I like the process itself. Except that is the longest part of this video. So, this is the first time I'm talking to you with my phone, which is my camera, by the way. Here I bring a cup of cherries, just not getting tired, I guess. If you do something so monotonous like this, do not overdo it. It's not good for your health, which is obvious. That's why at this point I would like to go into the fast mode. Alright, which soundtrack should I choose?
A few moments later.
After like a day or two, I've got this result. Don't know if it's good or not, but it hurts. However, if you haven't died of boredom yet, I'll remind you of the previous method, which I'm going to combine with obtained result. In short, I need to choose a tone for the lighting and then start the coloring process directly on the shadow. And since I'm not good at coloring at all, I'll make things easier for myself by using black and white tones. That way it will be easier to navigate. Looking at a white screen hurts my eyes, so I'm going to change the background to grey. Well, at least this step is faster than the previous one. And now here's a little bonus for those who watching me on YouTube. There is a short video that I wanted to check before starting the next step.
Let's give your line art that art school style shading.
Sounds intriguing.
With our line art, we just create a new layer and add in a shadow shape.
Well, I guess I don't need to do that.
The shape of the shadow is really important, right? This is where we get all the information about anatomy and form.
That's important.
After that, we create a new layer, and with a slightly darker gray, we trace the margin between the shadow and the highlight, basically creating a slightly darker mark between shadow and highlight. And this creates that core shadow, which sort of turns the rest of that shadow into a bounced light, and it has this really cool three-dimensional look.
So let's try it. About the shape of shadows. Since I've already shaded the drawing using hatching, the changes are hard to notice, but his method is great for spotting flaws. The tip is pretty good, but I barely see the difference. Or wait a second. Now that is a difference. This result is pretty, but I'll stick to the previous one, cause it feels more stylized in my opinion. And that's all for now. Thank you whoever you are who watched this video till the end. If you will notice some mistakes, please leave a comment below. Next time I think I'll see something about perspective and background. What? What the fuck?